Good morning. How we doing? Yeah, you better be good. Slept in. You know what my favorite thing is about daylight savings time? It shows you the people who are willing to wake up early because they really love Jesus. So, I'm kidding. Don't leave, please. Welcome to church. If you're new here, my name is Seth. I'm not on staff here. I don't work here. I'm kidding again. Last week, Philip was here. He is not one of the people on staff here, actually, for real. But he was here filling in. And as we've been going through this series in Exodus, he brought us to the point where the Israelites are launched out into the wilderness, where ultimately they would end up spending 40 years of their lives wandering around in that wilderness. And there's a lot of, you guys realize there's a lot of stuff that can happen in 40 years, right? Like those of you who are there, you realize that. The rest of you, they don't know. But a lot can happen in 40 years. And that's what we end up finding here, that God does so much work in his people, that there are so many important things that happen in the wilderness journey. What we saw last week is in the wilderness journey that God provided manna and quail to the people as they move forward in that. There's this story where the people are wandering and they're like, Moses, there's no water, we're going to die. And so Moses takes a stick and he whacks a rock and water comes out and the people have water. And then the Israelites end up at this enemy army, the Amalekites. And they defeat the Amalekites, these bunch of wanderers in the wilderness. And then Moses is sitting and he's judging the people, like giving them advice and walking them through things. And his father-in-law shows up and he's like, what are you doing? Don't do it this way. Do it this way instead, because fathers-in-law are apparently always right. And so Moses changes and he becomes a better leader. And all of that happened just between last week's text and this week, just a few chapters. And so this week we're going to pick up in Exodus chapter 19. So if you've got your Bibles, you can turn in them Exodus 19. If you don't own a Bible, you can head to the welcome booth outside. We'd love to gift you one, that just for you to have, to keep, to take that with you. And they'll be on the screens as well, so you'll be set there. So Exodus chapter 19, and we're going to pick it up with the first 8 verses. So here's what it says. It says, on the first day of the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day, they came to the desert of Sinai. And after they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, this is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my commandments, then out of all nations, you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. And the people all responded together, we will do everything the Lord has said. And so Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. So to this point, God has the Israelites traveling through the wilderness. They've been out there about 3 months. And at this point, they come to this mountain, and they set up camp at the base of this mountain. Now, it's a little harder to tell here because Exodus goes back and forth between what it calls this mountain, but right here it calls it Mount Sinai. But this isn't the first time that we've been at this mountain in this story. In fact, this mountain is also called Mount Horeb, which is where Moses encountered the burning bush, where Yahweh spoke to him. They are now at that same mountain. And so the first thing that we see right out of the gates is that God didn't just bring the Israelites to a place, he brought them to himself. This is part of the work that he's doing in the wilderness. The goal is not to take the Israelites to a certain place. The goal is to get the Israelites to Yahweh, to let them see him, to be with him, to be in relationship with him. That's what's going on here. And see, as they've moved through the wilderness, something was happening to them. Philip talked about this last week, how God was intentionally working through the people in a way that they would finally learn to trust God. They had come out of Egypt, and it was like they had Egypt all over them, and God had to remove the Egypt from them to get them to learn to trust him. It's almost like that season in, like the dating season in a relationship, right? Where you're learning to trust each other. You guys know what I'm talking about? Right? And like you're in that place where you're not quite sure what you can get away with saying yet. What kind of jokes will fly? What kind of things? Like if I share this about myself, is she going to leave forever? Right? Like you got to figure that out. You're in that place where you're not quite sure. And Kate and I think that we have one of the most absolutely ridiculous stories of this moment in our relationship. And it's so ingrained in our memories that it's become like this moment of learning to trust and acting on that trust has a catchphrase in our house because of the experience. So Katie and I, as we're dating, we're on a walk in her neighborhood, and we're walking, we're holding hands, we're a cute couple, all that kind of stuff. It was awesome. And we start to share some stories about our childhoods. And you guys have heard some of the stories about my kids. They had to get it from someone, okay? So, like, I got some weird kid stories. I got some wild kid stories. I got some things that I hope my parents never tell you guys, okay? That's what kind of kid I was. And so, as she's telling me stories, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, okay, how honest can I be? Like, if I throw out something wild and she sticks, then I know. Like, I've got her. Like, at this point, we're getting married. But do I want to risk that, right? Like, I don't want her to walk away either, because I don't know if I'll ever find another woman ever again, okay? So, like, I gotta balance this. And apparently, I hit the point that I did, in fact, feel safe enough that I'm like, okay, I'm going to share some of the most bizarre stories of my childhood. So I went for it. And I told Katie that when I was in preschool, there were two things that I regularly ate: sand and ants. Listen, kids are gross. You can't judge me, okay? All kids are gross. This is a fact, okay? My kids eat grosser things than ants. There's no stopping them. That's what they do, okay? But like if you just throw like the little bit of sand on it, like a garnish, it's like, I'm kidding. But I kid you not, okay? Katie and I are on this walk, and I just decide, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to share this story with her. And so I tell her about it. Literally, like in that moment, we're walking, I tell her this story, and we look up, and there's a stop sign. Katie took a picture of this stop sign. Here it is. Here it is. There it is. Do you see that sticker? Why die when you can eat ants? Like, what are the odds, right? And so this is the catchphrase in our marriage, okay? We're just like, why die when you can eat ants, right? Like, this is what it is, because we had that moment. I went out on a limb. I decided I can trust her, and it worked out. We're married now, and why die when you can eat ants, right? Now, listen, I know it's a ridiculous story. I know it's a bizarre thing to have a special meaning tied to a phrase like that. But also, like, we all realize how important it is to learn to trust before you step into a serious relationship like marriage, right? We realize that. Like if Katie and I couldn't trust each other with embarrassing childhood stories, then we couldn't trust each other with marriage. That's just a fact. That's the way it works. So if the wilderness was the dating moment, then this moment at Mount Sinai, can you see where this is going? Things are getting deeper here. The God and the people need to decide. Is this an actual commitment? Is this something that we are going to belong to each other? We can feel the weight of this moment as they step into this. And so they make a covenant. And for some reason, when we get to covenants in the Bible, we act like we don't know what covenants are, like it's just some weird, ambiguous idea. I don't know why we do that, but like we talk about covenants. We know what covenants are. Because the bottom line is covenant is relationship. That's what it is. And we should know this because when we talk about covenant, what do we talk about? Marriage. One person said it. One person got it. I don't know who you are, but you're the winner, okay? You get some Jesus points. Marriage. We talk about the covenant of marriage. It is relationship. It is Two parties coming together and saying, we are committing to one another. And that is what God has invited his people into. And this is so beautiful, guys. Like, God has this covenant with Abraham, right? And he tells Abraham that he's going to become this huge nation, that he's not even going to be able to count all of his descendants as if they're the sands of the sea or the stars of the sky. And so God's in a covenant. These are Abraham's descendants here before God. And yet God is so kind and he is so tender that even though they've already been born into this moment, he still asks them, do you really want this? Do you really want to be in this covenant with me? Do you really want this relationship with me? He is so kind in asking them that. See, let's look again at the exchange in Exodus 19:5. God is speaking, and he says, now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations, you will be my treasured possession. And then in verse 8, there's the response. And it says, the people all responded together, we will do everything the Lord has said. This is that moment like God has pulled out the ring, right? Like you're at Disneyland and the guy gets down on one knee and like everybody starts cheering, right? Like if we were reading through this for the first time and we didn't know the rest of the Bible, how awful Israel can be, right? If we're reading this for the first time, we're like, yes, it happened. We're here. New creation's coming. The rest of the book is going to be a treat, right? That's what you would think if it was your first time reading through. Because this is a celebratory moment. This is the moment that Israel is like, okay, we want to do what it takes to be in relationship with you. We're in. We're in. We want this relationship. Here's what Christopher J.H. Wright says about this moment. He says, quote, this personal element is even more emphatic in Hebrew than English. My voice, my covenant, my treasured possession, to me, for me. God is speaking in highly relational language, showing that the covenant relationship was intended from the very start to be not a matter of externalized contractual compliance with a body of law, but rather a matter of personal love. Deuteronomy's favorite word, gratitude, loyalty, and responsive cooperation with God's will and reflection of God's character, unquote. Do you get what he's saying? See, when God says, obey my commandments, a lot of times that feels a little like cracking the whip to us, like you better do this. But this is actually, when God is saying this is not like if I'm coming to Katie and saying, I would like for you to marry me. And so in order for this to work, I need you to be obedient and subservient to me. Are you in? Do you know what Katie would say? She'd say, peace out, fam. Like, I'm gone, okay? Like, I don't know if y'all have met my wife, but she ain't about that, okay? She's not, yeah. What this is actually like, okay, what's actually happening here is like if I went to Katie and I said, I want to marry you. Are you prepared to live as if the two of us are one? As if the two of us are one and the same? Same values, same character, same priorities, same loves. And the people emphatically answer yes. They're in. They've seen God move in Egypt to rescue them through the Red Sea. They've learned to trust God in the wilderness as he provides for them. And now they've seen undeniable evidence that they can trust God and they want to be in relationship with him. Church, this is a huge deal because it was literally just last week's sermon where in Exodus 16:3, the Israelites start crying out and they're like, if only Yahweh would have just killed us in Egypt, right? Because that would have been better than whatever this is out here with God, right? That's where they were last week, just a couple chapters ago. Because that's where they're like, at least when we were in Egypt, we had our meat pots, which don't read that in the King James Version because it says, at least in Egypt, we had our flesh pots. Doesn't that sound yummy? Bunch of flesh pots? No? Okay. And you might say in that moment, right? Like, no, Seth, they just didn't trust Moses. No, they didn't trust Moses because they didn't trust Yahweh. They didn't trust the God behind Moses. Just 3 chapters ago. Look how much work God has done in such a short amount of time in this people. Because now that Yahweh has done this work to strip away the pieces of Egypt that were on his people, stripped away those parts of Egypt, it is now time for him to replace those broken and tattered pieces with himself. And so then he says to them this in verses 5 and 6. He says, although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. I don't know if you guys realize this. Do you realize that God is actually like all of the nations belong to him? You guys realize that? Like the ones that you like and the ones that you don't like they all belong to God. The nations that practice things that you think is maybe less than ideal or maybe even worse than that, those belong to God. You guys realize that, right? Those are all his. And yet, just like in the covenant of marriage, God uses this deeply relational language to communicate how unique and special this people will be. This people. He calls them his treasured possession. This is the same word that's used to describe like the kings in this ancient narrative. Like if any of you are familiar with Solomon, the way that the Bible talks about Solomon is like he had so much gold and silver and treasure that basically treasure became worthless because he had so much of it. He was so enormously rich. That's how rich Solomon was. And so this treasured possession is like this idea of Solomon's warehouse where he keeps all of his gold, all of his wealth is in there. But then there's something separate outside of that. Something he keeps in a little box, locked up. He keeps it to himself. And if somebody took over Israel and stole all of the wealth, as long as they don't get this is the treasured possession. God owns it all. But this is unique. This is special. This is cherished. And that's what God calls his people. And so what does it look like to be God's prized possession? He first calls them to be a royal priesthood. Royal priesthood. So that just kind of means that they're like ultra religious and kind of weird, right? I mean, kind of, but that's not the whole extent of it. See, the priests had all sorts of jobs that they were a part of in the temple, but all of the jobs that they had fell under one greater category, one greater job. To be the middlemen between God and his people. The priests were the in-betweeners. They were the ones who communicated with God on behalf of the people and with the people on behalf of God, who sacrificed to God on behalf of the people's sins, who declared forgiveness to the people on behalf of God's forgiveness. And church, that's us now. 1 Peter 2:9 calls us a chosen people, a holy nation, and a royal priesthood. You guys recognize those phrases? We just read them. Peter says that's us now, that we get that responsibility. We are the ones who go on behalf of others. So what are the implications here? The implications are that relationship with God is vocational, that there is a job to do. There's work to be done to be in relationship with God. See, sometimes we think that relationship with God is just, that I go to church maybe twice a month, and I'll throw up some prayers to him when things are less than perfect. But that's not sharing his ideals. That's not sharing his loves. That's not sharing his heart. To put it bluntly, that's not relationship. It's something else entirely. To be in relationship with God means that you have a job, that you have decided to be on mission with God, to be a part of what he's a part of. And this is the part of Exodus where we normally start to get a little lost right here, because this is where we get into all the laws. All the laws start to happen right here. And this is where, you're doing your Bible in a year plan. You're feeling good because Genesis Genesis got some things going on. There's some drama. There's like families that are having some weird things happening. There's some stuff in there that you're like, oh my gosh, did I just read that? Right? All that's happening in a couple genealogies, but they're not very long, so you can get through them. And you like land on the Joseph story at the end. You're like, wow, that was a wild story. Open Exodus. Now there's a Pharaoh wanting to kill babies, and there's a Red Sea. And you're like, man, this is exciting. I'm ready to keep going. And then we get to this like, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. And we're like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? Right? Like this story was so exciting, and now all of a sudden what happened? Right? And like maybe you make it through Exodus, but you flip the page in Leviticus and you're like, all right, I'm out. Like this is too much. Right? But these laws, I want to encourage you, church. These laws are actually kind of exciting. There is so much to pull out of these. These laws aren't just there to make us act right. They serve two purposes, okay? And the first is to constantly remind us who God is and what it means to live like him. Like, what would it look like if just a wild thought experiment, if God were to put on flesh and live among us? What would that look like? What would that be like? It would be like Jesus. And Jesus was the fulfillment of the law. He filled it full. And so this is what this is pointing us to, is how to live this Christ-centered life. So Christopher J.H. Wright, who I quoted earlier, he connects Exodus 19 here to Leviticus 19, showing where the obedience to the law, the following of the laws, leads to this, where he says, quote, Leviticus 19 portrays a whole society living out the holiness of Yahweh in every area of personal, familial, and social life. Holiness required distinctive ethical standards. For example, in relation to social welfare, employment law and workers' rights, disability, the administration of justice, slander, health and safety, neighborly relations, racial equity, and commercial integrity, unquote. This is living out what it means to be in the fullness of God's reality, the way God intended for life to be. And so I know that we often struggle to understand the laws, but there is a way to read through the laws and to look at each section of laws. In fact, here's how I read through the laws, okay? Here's how I make it through, and I make it exciting when I'm going through these books, okay? So here's your pro tip. I like to read through, and I have these like imaginative buckets, okay? And these buckets are God's character, okay? So I've got like a bucket of God's love for my neighbors. And I'm reading through, and I'm like, thou shalt build a parapet around your roof. And I'm like, what? Oh, I dropped that in the bucket of God wants me to love my neighbors. Because if somebody's on the roof, he wants to make sure they don't fall off and die, okay? God cares about my neighbor. I've got this bucket of like anti-idolatry, that God is jealous for me. And I'm reading about how God is like, don't plant two kinds of seeds into the same field. And the ancient people outside of Israel would do this, hoping that the fertility God would bless them and give them abundance. And so I'm reading this, I'm like, I'm going to drop this in this bucket of God is jealous and wants me to worship only him and not take on the systems of the world for success, but to trust him for success. And so there's a way to read through these laws and to have these buckets of God's character and to learn about who he is, what his heart is, what his character is. So this is the first thing about the law, revealing to us who God is. But what about the second thing? Exodus 20:20. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. Okay, so first of all, I realize I skipped a bunch, okay? We just went from Exodus 19, now we're Exodus 20:20. If you guys have a physical paper Bible in front of you, you're looking down and you're like, Seth, you just skipped the entire 10 Commandments. Yes, I did. Join a small group. You will talk about them in your small group, okay? So they're not entirely skipped, but join a small group. But here's the reason why. The 10 Commandments are this small section of this greater section of laws. They serve as a subset of the whole of the laws that's doing something, taking us somewhere, forming something in us. And so, why does God give the laws at all? As a test. And we're like, as a test? As a test. That's a little weird, right? Can we agree with that? That's a little weird. Okay. Like, first of all, my thought is like, doesn't God already know whether or not I'll pass the test? Can't he just mark down my score without me having to take the test? Like, that would be really cool, right? Also, I'm a bad test taker, so this seems a little unfair. Like, y'all can go through the test, but I'm a bad test taker, so I need some extra mercy here, okay? Right? I feel good with that. Felicity, as she's gotten older, and I asked her permission, I got her permission to share this story. So she is 8 years old now, and she's in this place where she's clearly not as young as she used to be. She's not the baby anymore. She's not a toddler anymore, but she also can't do the things that bigger kids can do, right? She's like starting to get that preteen energy, but she's not actually like preteen yet. And so she's just in this like in-between place. And so like we'll give her some of these tasks to help her grow into who she's growing into. Those typically don't go well, right? Like typically it's not great. In fact, typically it results in a full-blown meltdown, right? Like kid just losing her mind. And lately, those meltdowns have gone even further, where it's like normal things that we ask her to do something normal, and she's just full-blown meltdown. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is happening in my house right now? Like, why is this my job, right? And so these meltdowns have turned into something where now it's like she can't find her pajamas. And she's like, Mom and Dad, I can't find my pajamas. And I'm like, did you check your drawer? And so she does the things that is only rational to a child. And she throws herself on the floor and she goes, I can't. And it's the end of the world and everybody's dying. And this is the end for all of us, right? Because I asked her to check her drawers for pajamas, okay? So it's like sobs, rolling on the floor, all this stuff. So we have instituted new laws in our house, okay? It's almost like we've instituted this law that's a part of our own personal 10 Commandments, all right? And so number one on this list, thou shalt not say I can't, because your dad's over it, all right? Like first and foremost, I'm over it, okay? So thou shalt not do that. But also, it's a test. Not in the way that we would typically think about tests, but it's a test in that every time she's faced with something that's a little bit challenging, no. Don't say that you can't. How do you overcome the test? How do you get reminded that you can do this, that you are growing into this, that, yeah, there are things that you can't do, but if your mom and dad are asking you to do something, it's because we know you can do it. It's constantly that reminder in front of her. And so for us, the law, this test, is constantly in front of us, testing us, but to show us where we are with God, to remind us how much we still need to be transformed, to constantly remind us who God is and who we are, and to show us where to go if we want to walk side by side with God. That's what these laws are doing. And so as God gives the 10 Commandments, and as he gives the laws that continue through Exodus and on, Moses is telling the people that God has come to test us. But it's a gracious test. It's a kind test. Because what the people newly stepping into this covenant need to know is, am I even ready for the promised land? Right? Like that's where they're supposed to be going. Are they even ready for it? Are they prepared for that? Like, God tests Adam and Eve. Second story in the Bible, right? The first is creation itself. He made Adam and Eve. Number two, he tests Adam and Eve. There's the tree of knowledge of good and bad. They failed the test. He tests Abraham to sacrifice his son. Before that, he tested Abraham to have a son. Abraham failed the test. He tested the Israelites in the wilderness, who regularly failed the test. And every single person you can think of in the entirety of the Old Testament went through the test. And it's because while we're sitting here begging to go back to Eden, begging to go into the promised land, begging for new creation, we need to answer the question, are we ready for a reality that is perfectly aligned with God himself? Are we ready for that? Because quite frankly, I look at my own life and I'm like, if I'm to step into God's full presence right now, there's a lot of stuff that's going to need to be burned away. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. I've got a lot of things that God needs to work through me and in me to get to this place. Are we ready for that? Like ultimately, the answer that we see time and time again is no. No, we're not ready. We keep failing the test. We're terrible at trusting God. We keep making idols. We keep breaking the covenant. We keep doing wrong over and over and over again. If the test has taught us anything, it's taught us that we can never force our way into being good enough. No matter how much you struggle to get there, you will never achieve it. We can never work hard enough to align ourselves with God. So it's starting to seem almost as if we need someone to come fulfill this end of the bargain for us. It's almost like we need someone to come fulfill the law, to come fill it full. It's almost like we need someone to pass the test on our behalf. Are you guys tracking with what I'm saying? Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted or to be tested by the devil. That Greek word there for tempt or to test is peirasthenia, which literally means test. All right, we often translate it to tempt, but it literally means test. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested by the devil. So we know that every human being since the beginning of human beings has failed the test. But what happens when Jesus faces the test? It's not that many verses, so we'll just read through it. Matthew 4:2. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, Jesus was hungry. Shocking already, I know. And the tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." And Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it's written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." And again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." And Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him and angels came and attended him. So Jesus doesn't just pass the test. Jesus passed 3 tests here. And did anything stand out about these tests to you guys? Did you notice anything interesting? They were all exactly what the Israelites went through. They were all the exact same tests. Like maybe at the very least you noticed the bread in the beginning. We literally spent so much time last week talking about bread. And Jesus is tempted with that same thing. Jesus goes through the exact things as the Israelites. The devil tempts him regarding provision, protection, and power. The Israelites constantly grumbled about food, about provision. They specifically had an issue with trusting God, with providing new food for them every single day. And so they would go and they would hoard and try to hoard as much food as they could, not trusting God that he would provide. And they failed the test. And there were maggots in their food. Even after the bread, the Israelites complained about God's protection, that he wasn't going to provide for them not just with the water and meat, but he's not going to protect them from these armies that when they go to these places with these big walls, they're too powerful, God. We can't handle that. We can't do that. They don't trust him with protection. They failed the test. Finally, Israel was tempted with power, the power that the other nations seemed to have from worshiping other gods. And sadly, Israel fails that test time and time again. But Jesus passes each test. Jesus passes the ultimate test. He went through the wilderness. Like, come on. Do you see what he's doing here? Jesus goes through the wilderness on his own, and he passes every test that the Israelites failed, saying, I've seen that you failed. I've seen that you couldn't do it. I will do it for you. I will go relive your story and do it the right way, trusting the Father and living out what it means to be in perfect covenantal relationship. And then ultimately from there, Jesus would go on to pass what is the ultimate test. It was the moment that he enters into a garden of all places. He enters a garden and he asks his friends to pray with him. As he prays, he sweats these great drops of blood and anxiety and stress. And he asks his friends to pray with him, not wanting to be alone in this moment. We can see the humanity of Jesus on full display here. He goes deep into this garden. He puts his face all the way to the ground and begs the Father, let this cup pass from me. In other words, let this test pass from me. Is there any other way to do this without going through this test? He's pleading not to go through the ultimate test, not to have to go to the cross, not to have to be beaten, mocked, and to take upon himself the sins of us. Yet the final words of his prayer, not my will, but yours. In other words, may my life live out your ideals, your loves, your laws, your will. Jesus perfectly embodies the heart of the Father, and he passes the ultimate test by going through the crucifixion and proving that he is in fact prepared to live in the perfect reality of God. And so here we stand at the proposal moment once again. Except this time it's not at the base of Mount Sinai. It's at the foot of the cross on Calvary. It's at the face of the empty tomb. And this time God has already passed the test on your behalf. The answer to whether or not you're prepared to enter into the fullness of God's reality is yes, because you have the opportunity to enter into it fully clothed in the robes of Christ's righteousness. So the question is no longer, can you pass the test? The question is, can you trust the one who's already passed the test on your behalf? And that's the question in front of all of us today. So some of you need to say yes to Jesus for the very first time. You've been trying to live your life. You've been trying to live a good life. For some reason, you're here in church today. Some reason or another, you decided to walk in here today, and you've been trying to live this good and moral life, but you keep failing. Just like everybody's failed the test. You're not alone in that. You are being invited today to say yes to the one who passed the test for you. Romans 10, 9 and 10 says that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And that is your invitation today. We'll have people up at the front of the stage to pray with you after if that's you. Many of you in here, you've already made some sort of commitment to God. You're in it. And so I want to remind you that entering into covenant with God is vocational. It's missional. You have a job to do. You are already God's treasured possession. Nothing you have to earn. You just are. And as his treasured possession, you live into the role of a royal priesthood. The one who goes between, who intercedes on behalf of this broken world. And so a few takeaways for us this morning. Number one, intercede for your oikos. Like I know we say intercede on behalf of this broken world, and we're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot, Seth. Have you seen how broken this world is? Unfortunately, I've seen pieces. I don't think anybody in this room actually grasps just how broken this world is. So start with your oikos. Start with the 8 to 15 people that Jesus has already strategically placed around you. People in your family, people that you're friends with, people at your place of work. Intercede on their behalf. Go to God for them. And when God has something to say to them, be prepared to share that. Number 2, pray the Lord's Prayer every day this week. See, there's this line in the Lord's Prayer where Jesus prays, lead us not into temptation. Again, same word, lead us not into the test, but deliver us from the evil one. Jesus even seemed to think that there was some goodness in saying the test is hard. Yeah, it reveals some good stuff about us, but the test is hard. If there's another way for Jesus to form you, lead us not into the test, but deliver us from the evil one. Make that your prayer every day this week. And number 3, this in reality should be up here every single week, but act more like Jesus this week. And here's what I'm saying. Find one intentional way, one thing that you can do to acknowledge and embrace the heart of God, the character of God. What is one thing you can do this week to act more like Jesus than you did last week? So intercede for your oikos, pray the Lord's Prayer, act more like Jesus this week. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your goodness. We thank you for Jesus, the one who's gone in between for us, who's passed the test for us. And so, Jesus, may we not take lightly what it is that you went through in order for us to be in relationship with you. Would you form us, Jesus? Would you lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one? And yet, Jesus, if we have to go through the test, would you go through it with us? Jesus, we pray over everyone in this room this morning, knowing that each of us are in different places and different seasons, different levels of our relationship with you. Would you just meet us where we are and help us to take those next steps? Help us to start becoming more like you little by little every day. So we give ourselves to you, Jesus. And it's in your perfect name that we pray. Amen.